Welcome back to the Deep Dive and our Science Corner series. This is where we get into some really fundamental ideas for, well, for anyone curious about how things work. Today, we're tackling something I find pretty fascinating: the efficient coding hypothesis. It's this really elegant idea about our brains, how they handle the sheer flood of information coming from our senses all the time.
It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, it's a truly foundational concept in neuroscience, trying to understand how the brain makes sense of it all.
Okay, let's just jump right in. I mean, think about it. The sights, sounds, textures, everything hitting you every single second. It's overwhelming, really.
It is an enormous amount of data.
And this hypothesis, the efficient coding hypothesis, it suggests our brains aren't just passively soaking it all up. They've evolved these clever ways, these shortcuts, maybe.
Yeah, exactly. Shortcuts, or perhaps more accurately, optimized strategies. Given that the brain has limited energy, limited resources, limited space even, it has to be smart about how it represents all that incoming information. The goal is efficiency. It's about encoding the most useful information in the most, well, economical way possible.
So it's like finding the signal in the noise, but also doing it cheaply.
Precisely. It's about maximizing the information gain while minimizing the redundancy, the stuff you don't strictly need. Think of it like really good data compression.
Okay, data compression for the brain. I like that. So our mission today is to unpack how this works.
Yes. How does the brain achieve this? It's not just about getting the information. It's about shedding the excess baggage. Yeah.
Like that brilliant editor you mentioned in the outline, taking a long text and just getting the core meaning.
That's a perfect analogy.
Yeah.
That's essentially what our sensory systems are striving to do.
And we're going to look at how this plays out across different senses. Vision, hearing.
Vision, hearing, yes, but also how it might influence the very wiring of the brain, the connectome. And we'll touch on how researchers actually test these ideas. Some of the findings are quite surprising.
Okay, sounds great. So where did this whole idea start? Who first proposed this?
The real groundwork was laid by Horace Barlow back in 1961.
61, okay.
He put forward this initial model. You see, a big goal in sensory neuroscience is understanding the brain's language. How does it translate light waves, sound waves, pressure into its own internal code?
Which is basically electrical signals, right? Action potential spikes.
Exactly. These electrical impulses traveling between neurons. Barlow's hypothesis was a way to start thinking about what those spikes mean, how they represent the outside world efficiently.
So if the spikes are the language, Barlow is trying to find the grammar, or maybe the dictionary, that prioritizes efficiency.
That's a very insightful way to think about it, yes. He proposed a theoretical framework, a lens to see these spikes not just as signals, but as efficiently organized information carriers. The brain isn't just a passive recorder, it's actively structuring its representations.
Because it has to be, right? Our brains aren't infinite computers. Efficiency must be a huge evolutionary plus.
Absolutely, a massive advantage.
Now, you mentioned a key prediction is that our senses should be tuned to the world we actually live in, the statistics of natural stimuli. How does that work out in practice?
Well, this is where it gets really compelling. If the brain is efficient, its processing should reflect the patterns found in nature. Natural sights, natural sounds, they aren't random static.
No, they have structure, edges, textures, melodies.
Precisely. Take vision. Natural images have statistical regularities. Researchers found that if you design computational filters to encode these natural image statistics efficiently, those filters look remarkably like the receptive fields of certain neurons in our primary visual cortex, V1.
Receptive fields. That's the specific little patch of the world a neuron pays attention to.
Essentially, yes. And these V1 simple cells are tuned to things like oriented edges and lines within those patches. That matches perfectly with efficiently coding the kinds of visual patterns dominant in natural scenes.
Wow. So the basic building blocks of our vision seem pre-optimized for what we look at. What about hearing? Same story?
A very similar principle applies. Natural sounds also have predictable statistical structures. For instance, many have this characteristic where lower frequencies have more power, often called a 1F spectrum. There are correlations across time.
Like a musical note having both a main pitch and faster vibrations within it?
Sort of, yes.
Yeah.
That kind of nested structure. And if you design networks optimized to encode natural sounds efficiently, the filters you end up with look quite similar to the frequency tuning we see in the cochlea, in our inner ear.
The cochlea, that's the spiral thingy that breaks down sound.
That's the one. Its filtering properties seem beautifully matched to the statistics of the sounds we typically hear.
It's like evolution sculpted our senses to be perfect first receivers for the signals that matter most.
That seems to be the case. And this efficiency drive goes further. It's also about dealing with redundancy.
Redundancy, meaning like information that's repeated.
Exactly. If lots of neurons are firing together telling the brain the same thing, that's potentially wasteful.
Okay, so the brain tries to cut that out. How?
One key concept is decorrelation. Think of an image. Nearby pixels are often very similar. Lots of correlation there.
Right.
Algorithms like independent component analysis, ITA, FABTIC, try to transform these correlated inputs like pixels into outputs that are statistically independent as possible. It's like finding the underlying separate causes or components of the sensory signal.
So the brain is basically asking, what are the core ingredients here?
In a way, yes. Stripping away the predictable, redundant parts to get at the essential information.
But I remember reading that early ICA had its limits.
That's true. Initial linear ICA models couldn't quite capture all the complex relationships in natural stimuli, things like how textures relate across scales or how objects appear. So researchers developed more advanced methods, temporal ICA, TICA to handle time-varying information, and things like hierarchical models to represent more complex features, like object properties beyond just pixel statistics. The brain's methods are likely quite sophisticated.
It sounds like it. Now, how do scientists actually prove this? It feels a bit abstract, this whole efficiency idea. How do you test it in a real brain?
It's definitely a challenge. But there are several clever ways researchers approach it. One major one is the predicted model approach.
Predicted model. Okay.
So you design a computer model. You build in the known statistics of natural stimuli, what the world is usually like, and you add known biological limits, like neural noise. Then you figure out what the optimal, most efficient response should be according to your model.
Ah, so you calculate the ideal efficient neuron, basically.
Right. And then you compare its predicted responses to how real neurons actually behave when shown the same stimuli.
That sounds like a solid way to check if biology is getting close to that theoretical optimum. Any key examples?
Oh, yes. A really nice one looked at retinal ganglion cells. These are the neurons sending visual info from the eye to the brain. A study back in 2012 did exactly this. They built an optimal model for these cells, responding to natural images, including noise. When they compared the model's predictions to real recordings, they found the actual cells were operating at about 80% efficiency, which is remarkably high.
80%. That's really close.
It is, and they also found the physical connections, the spatial wiring between cells in the retina, seems structured in a way that supports this efficient coding.
Wow, okay. Strong evidence. What other ways are there to test this?
Well, another way is more direct measurement. You record from neurons, while an animal or even a person experiences natural stimuli, watching a movie of a natural scene, listening to everyday sounds. Then you analyze the statistics of the neural firing patterns directly. Do they show signs of efficiency, like sparseness or reduced redundancy?
So observing the brain in action in a natural context.
Exactly. And a third approach is more theoretical. You mathematically derive the conditions under which a certain neural computation would be efficient. Then you check if the actual statistics of the sensory world meet those conditions. It's sort of asking, does the world provide the right kind of data for this efficient strategy to work?
Okay, so modeling, direct measurement, and theoretical checks. A multi-pronged attack on the question.
Precisely. It helps build a more robust case.
Now, we've talked a lot about vision and hearing. Does this apply elsewhere too? Other senses?
The principles are thought to be general, yes, though vision and hearing are definitely the most studied. In vision, you see efficient coding principles invoked for color processing, for motion detection, even for how we perceive depth using two-eye stereo vision. In each case, the idea is similar. Represent the relevant information accurately, while minimizing redundancy and coping with noise.
And for hearing, we talked about the cochlea and the FMAS structure. How does the brain continue that efficient processing further up the auditory pathway?
It seems to build on it. The goal remains getting high-fidelity information about pitch, loudness, timing, location, and so on, but at a low metabolic cost. This involves matching the neural code very closely to the statistics of different sound types.
Different types, like speech versus music versus, I don't know, a waterfall?
Exactly. Models using ICA, for example, can derive optimal filters for different sound classes, environmental sounds, animal calls, human speech. And remarkably, these derived filters often look very similar to the response properties of neurons at different stages.
So the filters derived just from the sound statistics match actual neuron behavior?
Yes. For instance, Filters optimized for speech statistics resemble the tuning of auditory nerve fibers quite closely. It suggests even that very early stage is highly adapted for speech.
That's amazing. A deep adaptation for language built right in.
It seems so. And higher up in the auditory cortex, you see neural responses correlating with sound statistics too, like how bandwidth relates to center frequency. And the idea of sparse coding pops up again.
Sparse coding, meaning only a few neurons fire for any given sound.
That's the gist, yes. It's another potential efficiency strategy. Instead of having lots of neurons firing weakly, you have a few firing strongly. This can lead to neurons with very specific tuning, sometimes even responding to multiple specific frequencies.
So the whole auditory system, from ear to cortex, seems geared towards efficient processing of the soundscape.
The evidence strongly points that way, yes.
Let's shift gears slightly. You mentioned earlier this isn't just about individual senses, but also brain networks, how different regions talk to each other.
Yes, that's a really exciting area. Applying efficient coding principles to connectonics, the study of brain connectivity. The core idea is the same. Brain regions need to communicate effectively, but they face constraints.
Constraints like energy use, and maybe just the time it takes for signals to travel.
Exactly. Metabolic cost is a big one, physical wiring limitations too. So the communication itself likely needs to be efficient.
How do you even measure efficiency of communication between brain areas?
Researchers are using tools from information theory here, specifically rate distortion theory.
Rate distortion. Sounds technical.
It is a bit, but the concept is intuitive. It deals with a trade-off between how much information you send, the rate, and how much accuracy you might lose in the process, the distortion or loss. Think of lossy compression, like MP3s for audio.
Ah, okay. You reduce the file size, but maybe lose a tiny bit of quality.
Precisely. So rate distortion theory helps model how brain networks might compress information for transmission, balancing the need for speed and low cost against the need for accuracy.
And they've developed ways to quantify this in actual brain networks.
Yes, using metrics often termed compression efficiency. One way involves simulating information flow, like a random walk, across the brain's structural network map. You can then estimate how efficiently information spreads and how much compression the network architecture allows while maintaining fidelity.
That's clever. Using the brain's own wiring map to see how well it supports compressed communication. What are the findings?
Really interesting stuff. Brain networks show patterns of this rate distortion trade-off that looks similar to engineered communication systems. It suggests these information theoretic principles might be quite fundamental.
So good design principles are good design principles, whether evolved or engineered.
It seems that way. Plus, biological factors clearly play a role. Things like blood flow, which reflects energy use, and myelination, the insulation on nerve fibers that speeds up signals, they correlate with this compression efficiency.
Which makes sense. Better wiring, more energy supports more efficient communication. Is there a link to development or cognition?
Yes, definitely. Network complexity, size, hierarchical structure, these seem related to compression efficiency. Regions with higher efficiency tend to expand more during development. And importantly, this network efficiency measure correlates with cognitive abilities like executive function, memory, reasoning.
So efficient internal communication might be fundamental for higher level thought.
It certainly appears to be a crucial factor. Limitations in this efficiency could potentially underlie some cognitive challenges.
This paints a really integrated picture. Efficient sensing, efficient internal communication. But what about noise? Real neurons are messy, aren't they? How does the hypothesis handle that biological reality?
That's absolutely critical. You can't ignore noise. Early models were often idealized, but current research actively incorporates noise. They use more realistic neuron models, like the linear nonlinear or LN model, and test how efficient coding works with noise.
So trying to find the best code despite the fuzziness.
Exactly. Using information theory concepts like mutual information helps find neural codes that maximize the signal transmission even when the channel is noisy. Researchers are optimizing both the filter part of the neuron model and its response part, using natural image statistics, for instance, to guide the optimization in the presence of noise.
And these more realistic models, do they still predict things that look like real neurons?
They do. They can generate receptive field properties very similar to those seen in the retina, for example, suggesting that efficient coding principles can operate effectively even within the constraints of noisy biology. It also gives insights into how systems might adapt if noise levels change.
Okay, so the theory is robust enough to handle the messiness. Now, one more term you mentioned briefly, active efficient coding. What's that about?
Yes. Active efficient coding broadens the picture. It suggests that Efficiency isn't just about how the brain processes sensory input, but also how the organism behaves to get better input in the first place.
Like how we move our eyes.
Exactly. Eye movements are a prime example. We don't just stare blankly, we actively scan scenes, fixating on informative points. Active efficient coding proposes that these actions, these sampling strategies, are also optimized alongside the neural code to achieve the most efficient overall representation of the world.
So it's perception and action working together for efficiency, a more complete system view.
Precisely. It connects the internal coding to the external behavior.
Before we wrap up, are there still big puzzles or debates around this hypothesis? Is it universally accepted?
Well, like any major scientific theory, it's constantly being refined and tested. One area of ongoing discussion is the observation that real neurons do sometimes show redundancy and correlated firing.
Which seems to contradict the idea of pure redundancy reduction.
On the surface, yes. But the thinking is evolving. Perhaps redundancy is reduced progressively across stages of processing. Or maybe some forms of correlation, creating what are called manifold representations, are actually useful for higher-level tasks, like learning abstract concepts or generalizing.
Interesting. So what looks like inefficiency at one level might serve a purpose elsewhere.
That's one possibility being explored. And of course, continuing to integrate realistic noise and biological constraints into the models remains crucial. We need to move beyond overly simplistic assumptions. The field is very active, constantly updating the hypothesis with new data and better models.
This has been absolutely fascinating, a really deep dive into how our brains might be master economists of information. It seems this drive for efficiency, for getting the most bang for the neural buck, is a powerful principle shaping everything from our senses to our brain networks.
I think that's a fair summary.
Right.
He provides a powerful framework for understanding neural design and function.
So to leave you, our listener, with something to chew on, how might this principle of efficient coding extend further? Could it influence how we learn, how we focus our attention, maybe even touch on aspects of consciousness? And what happens when this efficiency breaks down, either through information overload or, conversely, sensory deprivation? These are the kinds of big questions still driving research in this exciting corner of science. We really encourage you to explore further if this sparked your curiosity. Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.